Hey Pyro, thanks for that video response. Your main question, what did I mean by the ego? I think I used it in two different senses in that video. In the one hand, on the one hand, I sort of used it in the sense of uh, self-esteem and identity, and just that notion of being a person respected by other people, um, and so on and so forth. And the other sense I used it was a more metaphysical sense, maybe as Descartes thought of the rational will, the mind, as separate from and in control of the body. Um, that latter one is the one that I would want to transcend or just recontextualize, because that whole notion is just a philosophical idea. If we examine our experience closely, um, and we are not from the same historical background as Descartes, um, we probably wouldn't come to the same conclusion that we were just a rational will located inside, a fallen body that is driven by passions and is essentially a machine. Um, that's a philosophical construction, and we can certainly construct other philosophical concepts to understand how the body works and how our phenomenal experience is connected to that body. And I think the philosophy of embodiment, Lakoff and Johnson stuff, Varela's stuff, Andy Clark, um, lots of other guys that are really starting to move into this direction that you could call more materialist, in the sense that it's taking the form and structure of the brain into consideration, and the whole body really, but the structure of the brain into consideration when it tries to understand how we think. Whereas a lot of the AI computational guys who want to understand the brain as though it were a serial processor don't think that the structure of the brain and neurons and all that stuff is important at all. They think that we can create a thinking machine which is identical to the human brain on any medium, on silicone. And I think that's just misguided. And in a sense, it's a product of the Cartesian view that the mind is essentially nothing more than forms, than shapes, code, which can be programmed. Um, Views of embodiment sort of take us out of this whole context of a free will and a determined body, because there is no free will floating atop or within the body. I mean, that's impossible to naturalize. We cannot be scientists looking for physical explanations of the phenomenon that we experience and approach it from that angle. Descartes came up with that because he was theistic and that there was a God. And as long as we're going to say that there's a God, then we can pretty much use that to justify any kind of deduction or logical stance. We just have to say God says there's a soul, and so the soul is my rational will, and I have freedom over my body because God said so. So that whole notion is it's outdated, really, and still today the popular culture and even in academia, we're trying to figure out, well, is there freedom or is there determinism? And the people who think that there is free will, they jump up and down and go crazy because they're so happy that quantum physics happened, because now we can see that matter isn't as predictable as we thought. But that's just, quantum physics deals with such a micro perspective of the universe that it doesn't exactly or necessarily translate into some relevant way of understanding this macro scale that you and I interact on. So I don't buy into that idea that quantum physics proves free will. But at the same time, I don't think that the fact that this is all a physical process means that it's all determined. And when I say physical, I don't necessarily mean that it's all just material atoms bouncing into each other and randomly forming these complex patterns. Physical just means that there is a hidden law, and the law doesn't have to be something that we can spell out in English or even in math. Um, it's just that there is an order to the cosmos, and I don't think that's much of a leap. If we assume that human beings are intelligent, that intelligence couldn't just be a fluke. It has to be somehow embedded in the natural order of the whole universe. And I don't see how we can get around that. Um, a lot of materialists who take it a step further and say, like, it's all atoms and it's all random and there is no intelligence. They're assuming that only humans are somehow intelligent and that only humans using that intelligence can know that the world is just random collisions of particles. And that's a dualism that's much like Descartes. It's fundamentally like Descartes, and I don't see how it works. Um, but definitely, to get back to my video, I think I wasn't trying to get pity or play the poor me card or anything at all. I think my problem is I'm trying to reconcile a personal view of my own life and the impersonal pursuit of knowledge, objective knowledge. And somehow that gap right there is a dualism between mind and matter, or myself and the other, or the public and the private, or public and private life. And all of these dualisms are essentially a product of, or a symptom of, what Descartes was articulating, 500 years ago, and we've carried it up to our own current times, and the extreme separation between the mind and the body is driving people crazy, and it's destroying the world because our instrumental use of technology to exploit nature is a function of Cartesian science, I think, because it's like we are this intelligence from heaven that God planted in our human brains, and it's our duty to organize and exploit the world around us to our own ends. And it's essentially a biblical idea that carried over right into science. And so, we draw the line sometimes so sharply between science and religion, and it's not really there. These are all connected ideas. And that type of metaphysical notion of the ego as the one in control, the intelligent free will that isn't corrupted by the physical nature of the earthly realm, needs to go because it's destroying everything. We need a new philosophical understanding of our place in the cosmos. And, it's what I love to think about and work on. We need a new second person perspective, a new way to communicate with each other so that we can see that we aren't these totally buffered, enclosed egos, that in fact we have to relate to one another and to nature. And the notion of free will and determinism may require another video. I mean, I've made videos about this before where I tried to move to, instead of freedom versus determinism, novelty versus habit, in the sense that most of the universe functions because of habitual patterns, reoccurring over and over. That's what allows evolution to occur. That's why we have structure at all. Without any habit, there is no structure, there's no form. But at the same time, without any novelty, there's no evolution, there's no change, there is no dynamism, dynamic change. There's just solidity. And what novelty and habit does, whereas free will and determinism doesn't do, is it allows us to get rid of a dualism. Because no longer is it I, or no longer is it only human beings who are free and the rest of nature is determined. Because, Descartes thought that animals don't have souls. Nature is fundamentally nothing but a mechanism, and only humans are intelligent and free. Novelty and habit doesn't separate human beings from the picture anymore. Not only are humans capable of creating novelty, but all of nature is capable of creating novelty because humans are fundamentally products of the natural evolutionary development of this cosmos. So, yeah, thanks for listening.